world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
We are back on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Monday, December 22nd, as you are listening to this, and we've got a lot to talk about. We always have a lot to talk about with this administration. Now, I'm still behind on getting things posted here and there. I've run into some new complications with I use Zoom. I think I've gotten, I had that missing episode that came up. Still can't download the one part of it, so I'm giving up on that one. Unless you guys really want it, if you want me to download, if it does pop through in the next 2 days, if you want me to download it and post it, go ahead. I'm still working on getting the bugs worked out on my automation thing. Part of that's why I don't have my stuff up as early as possible. But I did talk to somebody in their technical support, and they gave me something to try. I don't know if I'm going to have time to try it with today's episode, so if it gets hung up, I do apologize. But I'm going to try it for tomorrow's episode and see if that makes a difference, and maybe that will be up in a better time. I am working on getting more stuff up on Spotify, trying to get that all caught up. I thought I would have been caught up through, yesterday. That didn't quite happen. Hopefully, after I get this recorded, I will get some of, if not everything, caught up over there on Spotify. And once I get caught up, it should be rather easy for me to stay caught up. You may have noticed I haven't been posting a lot of TikToks lately. Well, with work schedule and everything else going on, it has been my schedule's been really crazy and hectic. A couple days I didn't even have a full 8 hours in between shifts by the time I got home before I had to be back, and it threw my sleep schedule off. This month has been hectic, and of course, we're in winter, which is more of a cold and flu season. Having a lot of employees, needing coverage and covering it last minute and things like that. In fact, not long after I record this, I'm going to have to end up. I had gotten a phone call right before I sat down to record, saying, "Hey, can you come in for a couple of hours?" And I was supposed to have been off most of today, so I don't care. I'll do work, whatever. It's affecting getting everything out. I just wanted to be transparent and let you know what's all going on. Now we got a lot to talk about. Like I said, we've always got a lot to talk about. Now, CBS did kind of an unpopular thing. Their long-running show, 60 Minutes, was supposed to air last night. They were supposed to put up an episode talking about CCOT, that prison in El Salvador, and they decided to pull it. Now, apparently, they were going to talk about all of the atrocities going on in CCOT and how bad it really was, and who knew what about how bad it was, and what did we as a country approve of. Maybe not as a country, but as this administration. And that whole thing got shelved. So this is kind of a big thing. This just tells us that the media is not on our side. Even what were considered liberal sources in the media, like CBS, etc., they still kowtow to Donald Trump. They are not calling him out nearly as strongly as they should. And when we get through all this, we need to remember that they are not necessarily our friends. Now, I do use places like CBS, CNN, etc., to get the gist of the story, and then I look a little deeper into it. And I break things down. I look into what I think could actually happen and what could go on. They give me the starting point, and I take it from there. But that's only in part because I don't have access to the same people these news organizations do. I can't go get an interview with um, a member of Congress, for example. If I were to call my local rep, they wouldn't answer, right? I mean, they may take a message or whatever, but I wouldn't talk to them directly. And not that I would want to talk to anybody from here in Iowa because they're all Republicans and most of them are MAGA, and uh, they're in line with everything this administration is doing. So we got to remember that the media is not our friend right now. If they would have handled Donald Trump the way he deserves to be treated, going all the way back to his starting to run in 2015 and 2016, he wouldn't be um, a thing right now. He wouldn't be, a contender for any of this. He is only here because of the media. The media decided that Donald Trump was good for ratings. And I remember seeing clips of him talking at varying events where he sounded like a dumbass. As he was running for president, he would say something completely unhinged, or he mocked a disabled reporter, or whatever the case may be. And instead of playing the clip and saying, seriously, is this the kind of person you want for president? This guy's a joke, and calling him out or pointing out where the stuff he said was just blatantly wrong or stupid or wouldn't work the way he said, they ran the clip like it was done by a serious politician. And they're still doing that. Donald Trump comes out and says, we're going to lower pharmaceuticals 4, 5, 600%, 1400%, or whatever the number is he comes up with that day, whatever he thinks sounds great, because he doesn't understand how percentages work. You can't say something went down by more than 100%. Now, I think I know what he is trying to say. When people talk about pharmaceuticals, for example, they're going to say, well, my costs have gone up 400%. Well, that means your $10 prescription is now $40. That's what they mean. And when he says, well, we're going to reduce it by 400%, he means, I believe, and maybe I'm giving him too much credit, that they're going to take it back to that original $10. But that's not what he's saying when he says he's going to reduce prices by 400%. He is saying that if your prescription costs $10 now and he's reducing the price 400% every time you get it filled, they are going to give you $30. That is how reducing it by 400% works. It makes it free with a refund. Donald Trump doesn't realize, doesn't know, or doesn't care how dumb he actually sounds when it comes to saying things like this. Now, Donald Trump, beyond all of it, um, proves why his businesses have failed. He has had 6 or 7 bankruptcies, and all of his companies have failed. Look at what happened to his casinos. The guy bankrupted a casino, and those things practically make money. Now, yes, I know sometimes they go out of business because, for one, it's become less popular, or repair costs are going to be too high, or a new casino opens in the same market and now it is, uh, you know, losing business. Those things happen, specifically in places like Vegas where they have, 40 some casinos and tons of competition. Um, Eventually, it comes time to stagnate and you change things. But that's not what happened with Donald Trump and his casinos. He had casinos in Atlantic City, and he was told by the uh, architects, by the builders, by the gaming commission, by everybody that looked into it, that were experts in building casinos in Atlantic City, and said, well, your gaming floor has to be so big, your hotel needs to be this big, and that is how much of the market share you are going to capture, and this is where you'll be profitable. And Donald Trump did what Donald Trump does and goes, yeah, I know better, and goes with it. He ran with building it however he wanted, and then he went bankrupt. Donald Trump is not a smart man. And the media, going back to what I started with, the media never treated him like an idiot. They played him like a regular politician, like he was some kind of a genius, and they gave him credibility. And by putting him out there like he was a normal politician, when he was running against Hillary Clinton, instead of treating him like a buffoon, um, they treated him like he was credible. So people who were disillusioned by Hillary, who didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton because she was an establishment Democrat, she wasn't likable, um, and she had all of the other issues that the Republicans could exploit. They turned around and they gave Donald Trump credibility enough that he was able to fall ass backwards into the presidency. I don't think he ever intended to be president. I think his plan was to run, put up a good fight, maybe all the way to the convention, fundraise for as long as he could, and then turn around and say, well, I put up a good fight and, it was rigged against me, play his stupid bullshit, wait the length of time he had to, and pocket whatever funds he had left over. Next thing he knows, you turn around and he starts picking up steam and he's gaining delegates because the Republicans weren't, um, they weren't uh, on board. They weren't unified against him. You had too many options. They spread themselves too thin, and their best player against them was Jeb Bush. And we had just gotten out of 8 years of fixing everything that a Bush caused. Jeb Bush was not the answer on the Republican side of things, but they didn't really have a great politician on their side. Um, and what happened? We end up with Donald Trump, and the media is responsible in part for uh, us getting Donald Trump because they didn't treat him like the buffoon he is. They never learned from that because all they learned was, well, if we keep treating him like a serious politician, people are going to tune in because this guy's a fucking train wreck, and they're going to keep watching to see what else he does. So that's how we ended up with uh, Donald Trump because of the media. Going back to how I originally started talking about this CCOT thing, CBS, they need to learn, and this isn't the first time they've kowtowed to Donald Trump. They ended, was it late night with Colbert, I believe, all because of Donald Trump. Yeah, they Donald Trump heard some things on there that he didn't like, and now they're ending a long running show claiming ratings all because they needed an excuse, even though it was one of the highest rated shows on TV and in that time slot, etc. It's a joke, and CBS is going to suffer for it. And I think they haven't realized yet, and I don't think this goes to all of the media, that the younger generations that are coming up are not going to the same sources for information that they used to. You know, they're not tuning in to the CBS nightly news or CNN or whatever, um, like they used to. They're looking for alternatives, like, for example, this podcast or other podcasts, places like Under the Desk News or Aaron Parnas, short, quick stories, um, and that are more factual, that are telling them actually what is going on and not actually just kowtowing to the government or toward one party or the other. So we'll see if CBS ultimately releases this thing at some point, or if it somehow gets leaked out or something, and we'll have to see who knew what, who knew when about it. Ultimately, if it's as bad as some of the rumors we had heard about how bad things were in CCOT, when the Democrats are back in charge, there are going to be congressional investigations and congressional charges potentially brought up. And we'll have to see how that all plays out, as far as any of that goes. Now, the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is talking about upping the reward or the bonus or the payout, whatever you want to call it, for undocumented illegal immigrants that self-deport, uh, up to now $3,000. But we haven't heard too much about these self-deportations. Um, and I don't know exactly what the process is for people to claim that money. Um, because, we're hearing that, or we've heard in the past that some people that were trying to leave the country, you know, they were actually getting detained by ICE and being deported, even though they were trying to leave. Um, so is all they're doing is saying, hey, here's a bonus, here's some extra money, and we're going to turn around and give you, we're going to say we're going to give you the money, but then we're just going to use it to cultivate a list of people to actually go after. And oh yeah, we'll just apprehend you at the airport or at the border crossing when you're trying to leave. And then we'll physically remove you even though you're already going. So that way we don't have to pay you the money. The other thing is typical with this administration is where is the money coming from? What budget are they pulling this $3,000 bonus from? Uh, this administration likes to move money around, call things different than what they actually are. And there needs to be some accounting for that. I don't think this bonus is actually going to work, but it's the latest in their efforts of trying to deport and get rid of tons of legal and illegal immigrants. They don't care if you've done it the right way. That's the talking point we hear about people on the right. And that, oh, well, we want them to come through immigration and do it the right way. But then why is ICE detaining people at their immigration hearing? They're trying to do it the right way and come here legally. And ICE is saying, no, fuck you. We're throwing you on a plane and you're getting out of here. Well, those two things don't jive. They don't mix, right? This whole situation is um, troubling for a lot of reasons. Um, it's very troubling that they have um, all of this going on, and they're going after people that are, they said, well, we're only going to go after the criminals, right? Problem is, you're getting after people who have been here in some cases decades and have never once committed a crime. The only crime they've committed is being here undocumented, illegally, and those aren't violent crimes. But Donald Trump, of course, says, "Well, they're sending their worst. They're releasing the prisons. They're releasing the asylums." And Donald Trump says things like that because he doesn't know the difference between something like political asylum and a mental asylum. He thinks they're the same thing because he only knows the definition of one word and he's not very bright. He's got the mentality before the dementia of about a fourth grader. So they're coming up with these bonuses or whatever you want to call them to deport people. Yet they came after we went after Barack Obama at the time. A lot of people were calling him the deporter in chief because he deported so many people and they cracked down on immigration. Yet he was doing it the right way, and they didn't have to give these bonuses. They didn't have to spend ungodly amounts of money on ICE and on things like that, trying to get people out of here. They used the existing systems in place and just moved it along. Now, if they really wanted to fix immigration, there was a bipartisan deal going into the presidential election in 2024 that was on the table. Best deal Republicans were going to get from Democrats ever. And they had the votes to pass it through both chambers of Congress. And I believe Joe Biden would have signed it. Best deal they could have got. Pretty much gave them everything they wanted: increased border security, border wall money, limits on when the president could shut down the border, all sorts of things. Donald Trump said, kill the bill. It was a bad bill. Why? Because he wanted to run on immigration. Now, obviously, running on immigration apparently worked, but he had no other strategy for the election other than to run on immigration. And that kind of led us here. and they didn't have the votes to pass it around the Republicans. They couldn't get enough Republicans in the House to side with them. Democrats could have passed it potentially in the Senate, but they might not have gotten through the filibuster. All because Donald Trump said no, because he knew he had to run on immigration. But they're not doing anything the right way. They're just going after people. And this ties back to this opening story that CCOT prison was the one in El Salvador where they were sending people, criminally detaining them in CCOT for the only thing they did, which was be here illegally, which the punishment for being here illegally is removal and being sent back to your home country or potentially a third country under very strict, very certain circumstances. But this administration doesn't care about the actual letter of the law. They just want to do whatever they want. Donald Trump wants to run and lead by fiat. He says, "Oh, we're doing it this way. It's good enough." Now, one of the things Donald Trump is doing with almost everything he is doing is he is doing it all by executive order, right? So by going with executive order almost exclusively, that is setting things up to be easily overturned. Now, we have three types of laws effectively in this country on the federal level. I guess four types of laws. You have executive orders, which are only in place as long as they are not overturned by a following executive order by any president, including the president that signed it initially. Then you have congressional, just straight laws. Okay. You have Congress passes a law, like something we're going to talk about in a little bit, the Epstein File Release Act. I think it's called the Epstein File Transparency Act or something like that, but whatever. Both chambers of Congress pass it, the president signs it, or both chambers of Congress pass it, the president vetoes it, it goes back to Congress, and it gets passed. If you're over a certain age, this would be what they were talking about in the Schoolhouse Rock song, "I'm Just a Bill." And if you are over a certain age and you know what I'm talking about, and you have kids under a certain age, might not be a bad idea to play that for them. Yes, it's a little campy, but it explains everything very, very well. Okay. Then we have Supreme Court decisions. They're not exactly laws, they're interpretations of laws, but they function like laws. And how those work is, for example, Supreme Court gets a lawsuit over something. They look at the relevant law and they make a ruling on how that law should be applied or how things should work. One everybody is probably very familiar with is the Miranda case. Now, in Miranda, they ruled that the defendant in that case, a man whose last name was Miranda, had his civil rights violated when he was detained and asked by the cops to answer a bunch of questions because they didn't explain to him that he had the right to not actually answer any of those questions. He had the right to remain silent. That he also didn't understand that he could have gotten an attorney. Again, what the Supreme Court did when they looked at that case, they said, "Hey, this guy's constitutional rights were violated because he could have had, he had the right to remain silent, but he wasn't aware. He had the right to an attorney, but he didn't know." That is where reading of the Miranda rights comes from. The Supreme Court ruled that when you are detained and you are being questioned by the police, they are supposed to read you your Miranda rights and remind you that you have these things. Why? Because in the little bit of time it takes you to advise them of that, in the moment, people are hectic, they're frantic, they're freaking out because now they're being investigated for something or whatever. They may be in custody, whatever the case may be. They might not be thinking clearly. And if the police don't remind them that these are an option, they may not invoke them, even though they have the right to do so. And in some cases, people just aren't aware, or at least they weren't at the time. It has become a more commonly known thing since then that you have these rights. And ever since that ruling, it's one of the things you always see on TV now with cop shows. They arrest somebody, and one of the first things they do is they read them their Miranda rights. And everybody who has seen some sort of a cop documentary has known it. They know what we're talking about now. When you say, well, they didn't read the Miranda rights, you know where that comes from. Supreme Court decisions are pretty strong. They can only be overturned by either passing a law that changes the original law you're talking about, either gets rid of it, changes it somehow or whatever, so makes it not a thing, by another Supreme Court decision, or by an amendment to the Constitution. And the last thing we have is amendments, right? We have amendments to the Constitution where you change the text of the original document. And we've done that 27 times. And the only way to change something as an amendment is with a different amendment. And we have done that. For example, we have changed, at one point, we passed an amendment to ban alcohol. I believe that was the 19th Amendment. For like 3 years, there was alcohol. We had prohibition. You couldn't make, you couldn't drink, you couldn't have alcohol. And then they realized that was a bad idea, and they passed the 22nd or 21st Amendment, which repealed the 19th and made alcohol legal again in the United States. So you can make an amendment to the Constitution. Now, some of them have held the test of time, and they have held up. Other ones, like I said, the 19th we've changed. We've had to do other modifications, and we've even modified who can be, elected to certain positions. They changed with the 11th Amendment to the Constitution. There was never a qualifier that said the vice president had to meet the same qualifications as the president. Now, you would think they should, but it didn't, in part because that was also where they changed how presidents were elected, presidents and vice presidents. Because prior to the 11th Amendment, they would vote, and it would be the highest vote getter would be president in the Electoral College, and the second highest vote getter would be the vice president. And they realized rather quickly this isn't going to work. So that's when you ended up with tickets. But then they also clarified in the 11th Amendment, not only are you voting for, somebody as president and vice president, but you are also, if you are running for vice president, you must also have the qualifications to be president. That would prevent somebody who was not an American citizen or not 35 years old from being a vice president. Then we added in the 22nd Amendment, which put in term limits, and then we added the 25th for the presidency, which set up the line of succession. They cemented what happens beyond just vice president becomes president, and et cetera. And but Donald Trump is doing everything by executive order, getting kind of back to my original point here. And those are easily overturned. And he's also doing things like with the Kennedy Center. He's violating federal law by putting up his name. And of course, this was pre-planned. They muted the mics of certain people. Certain people weren't allowed to talk, weren't allowed to vote. It wasn't going to be unanimous. And Donald Trump wanted it to be unanimous for the look because he thought, well, if the board fully says it's unanimous and we can pass it on as, man, I'm so popular, that it will work and people would just accept it and move on. And within a day, they already had the lettering up on the Trump Kennedy Center. At least that's what they want to call it. It is going to be considered the Kennedy Center, period. And when he is gone, maybe not when J.D. Vance becomes president, because I believe Donald Trump will not make it to 2029. But in 29, when there is a Democratic president, the Trump name is going to be removed because they didn't do it the right way. The right way would have been going through Congress. But he's also doing things through executive order, and those are easily overturned, which is, I guess, was my original point. They're doing things the dumb way, and they are, skirting the law at every turn. Okay. Now we have the Epstein files, and they have released like less than 1% of what they have. It's ridiculous. They've added a little bit to it, and they've also taken some things away. And there was one photo that had Donald Trump and some women in the photo. I don't know if they were of age or underage. And they all had their faces obscured, made it sure look like those were victims. And they took the photo down. Now, you couldn't see anything, you couldn't figure out who they were. That wasn't the point. They took it down because it was an image of Donald Trump. The DOJ is trying to go around and redact all this, etc. And Todd Blanche is trying to say, well, some's going to come out now, some's going to come out in a little bit. It's going to take us a while to fully redact all of this. All the files are so huge. Well, that may be. They may say that, but that's not what the law says. The law says that they had 30 days, and that 30 days was up on Friday. And they have not released everything to the public. They just haven't. And what they have released is purposefully trying to harm certain people. They are trying to make certain people look worse than what they are. For example, there is a photo with Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, and what appears to be victims because they are children and they have their faces obscured. But turns out it was like two of Michael Jackson's kids and one or two of Diana Ross's kids. I don't remember how many kids are actually in the photo. And I think Epstein might be in that photo. But Epstein, like Donald Trump, apparently not only was he in the finance world, he was also in the real estate game. And apparently, that was a very public photo from the time when Michael Jackson bought a place and Epstein was involved in the transaction somehow. I don't know if he was the realtor or if he was the person who built it. I don't know his exact connection there, but it was all above board. It wasn't anything other than showing Michael Jackson knew Epstein, which for somebody who was as high profile as Epstein, that is not a crime in and of itself. The crime becomes that, they participated in any of the events that went on at Epstein Island or on the plane or at any of Epstein's residences. But they're trying to control the narrative. They want to take any mention of Donald Trump out. They want to make Donald Trump look like a hero, look great, look good, whatever the case may be. And that's just not what reality is here. We know Donald Trump is going to be in the files and that these members of the DOJ have not complied with the law. Now, we are hearing that Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna, a Republican and a Democrat, the two co-authors of the Epstein Transparency Act, are talking about potentially impeaching Pam Bondi over this. And it might not just be Bondi, it might be Kash Patel and maybe others. That they are going to go after these people for not releasing the files and violating what they signed as a statute. And I said at the time when they passed the law, and I said in between there that I think if they fuck around with the files, that this could happen. Now, we've got one Republican, Massie, on board already for impeaching Pam Bondi. I don't know how many other Republicans are going to be on board, but it wouldn't take very many. I think they only need 4 or 5. Now, I firmly believe that what will happen here is if the Republicans do pass a measure, because they're probably going to need a discharge petition to pass articles of impeachment on Pam Bondi. I don't think Mike Johnson would bring it up for a vote. And that is going to be brought up obviously next year. I don't think they're going to come back into session now before January. But they are going to end up needing to file articles of impeachment, or if they need a discharge petition to bring up these articles, I should say, to bring them up and have a vote in the House, it would pass. Because, I don't think they're going to make the move if they don't already have the 4 or 5 Republicans on board to, make it happen, right? And they are going to, if they impeach Bondi in the House, it would go to the Senate for trial. Now, I've said before, I don't think Republicans are going to actually get on board to bring up charges on one of their own and make an enemy of Donald Trump, despite the fact that he is becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. That he that they wouldn't do that unless they knew for sure they had the votes in the Senate. Now, it's going to take a high bar of votes in the Senate to remove Bondi. It would take like 20 Republicans. However, if the Republicans are looking ahead to 26 and 28, going, God, we're going to get slaughtered here. They may be willing to make a move and go after Pam Bondi and start the process. And then, of course, Donald Trump is going to react and he's going to come out, well, you couldn't stand against me. You're going to be hostile to this administration or whatever. And, he's going to make his threats. And it'll be very interesting to see what happens after those threats come out if this proceeds. And if he starts threatening members of Congress, let's say before they draft up and they pass articles of impeachment and it still passes, like I said, I don't expect it to pass in the House unless they have the votes in the Senate to remove her. And that goes for anybody in this administration that is being looked at by the House for any sort of impeachment inquiry, things like that. That they're not going to make a move unless they have the votes. So if Donald Trump comes out and starts threatening that they're going to be hostile and they're going to get primaried in this and that, and they say do it, and they go after her anyway, it is a sign that what I have been saying all along is going to pass, that Donald Trump will probably be removed by this Congress, by the Republicans, that they are ready to move past Donald Trump. Now, what happens when somebody like Donald Trump gets pushback? Well, they back down. Look what happened with the Epstein File Transparency Act as they were voting on it, right? They're voting on the Epstein File Act, and they said, yeah, we're going to vote to release the Epstein files. Donald Trump had said for weeks that if they voted to release the files, they would be considered hostile to this administration. They would get primaried, they would get challenged, etc. And what happened? Nothing. Ultimately, when the numbers started to go against Donald Trump and he could tell that they were going to pass it and it was going to be bad and that they were moving in a major bipartisan fashion, he turned around and ultimately backed down and said, yeah, okay, go ahead. I want you to pass it. Go ahead and vote for it. Because that way it would look good for him that he would end up having all kinds of, that he would have supported it, and that he thought he could control that narrative. Not realizing that a lot of people would remember the simple fact that he wanted to not release the Epstein files, right? He's going to back down. He won't do anything if they remove Bondi, and she would be the first person ever removed in a impeachment event, in an impeachment trial, I guess. Because we've come close, but it's never happened. And Donald Trump backs off. I think that's when the Republicans pounce and they turn around and go, okay, this motherfucker's weak as shit. And it's time to move on. It's time to move past him. We need to get reelected in 2026. We need to not worry about pleasing Donald Trump. We have to save our asses. We have to save our jobs. Now, speaking of saving their jobs, there is another discharge petition going to be voted on next year. Sounds like they're not coming back until sometime in January, probably around January 3rd. And it is on healthcare. It is on extending the ACA subsidies. Okay. They're not voting on it until the 3rd. And that's bad news for Americans. It really is. Um, they, uh, they're willing to let everything expire. Now, I don't know where they're getting this number from, but I'm hearing varying news articles that are saying that members of Congress are saying, well, we have really until the 15th before it has to be absolutely passed because we can still fix it by then. And I don't know why they come up with the 15th. I don't know if there is some kind of a date, if that's the date when premiums would be due for people, or if 2 weeks, if they figure that the insurance companies would grant them 2 weeks of leniency to figure it out. I'm not sure where they're getting that 15th number from, but that seems to be the number everybody is agreeing on would be the cutoff point. That would be the time in which they say, okay, now the price hikes are going to go up. So there's a discharge petition, and it's for 3 years. And it would extend the current ACA subsidies that are going to expire as of December 31st, a mere 9 days from now, for 3 years. Now, they had all kinds of time to pass this. But see, Republicans, I think, were hoping that people wouldn't be pissed about it, that they could just let it go and nobody would care. Nobody would say anything. They have been wanting to defund Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, since it passed, and they've never had a good health care alternative. And part of the problem is because this was basically a reskinned version of their plan. This is a reskin of Romney Care, which was passed in Massachusetts when Mitt Romney was governor. It's the Republican plan. And they already stripped out all of the things that would have been better. In the original ACA, there was going to be um, the single payer option, the government option, where you could buy effectively into Medicare, even though you wouldn't necessarily qualify under normal circumstances. Your premium and your rate would be higher, I think, the way I understand it, but you would get the same care and the same health insurance effectively as somebody on Medicare. Basically, the way I understand it is you would, instead of the government picking up most of the tab, like what they do with Medicare, you would be paying a premium amount, however they would calculate that number. But Republicans stripped that away. And they have been trying to defund uh, the Affordable Care Act ever since. And it hasn't worked, right? And now that people are used to the Affordable Care Act, they want it to fail so they can get rid of it. What are they going to do when everybody who was, I don't know, 25 and under as of 2010 starts to lose their health care, when things start to change and the ways things were, uh, and it goes back to before the Affordable Care Act, how things were before 2010. I remember what it was like before the Affordable Care Act. Okay. Even your employer sponsored plans could tack on yearly and lifetime limits to how much insurance you were going to get, how much they were going to pay. So you had one super expensive medical event, and it could potentially limit you for the rest of your life. I had a coworker at the time, not long after the Affordable Care Act. I think it was actually the year the Affordable Care Act was passed and how it was going to change things for the following insurance year. Who, if I remember correctly, because they had a major back surgery, um, that was going to put them under the previous plan. It was going to put them very close to being dollar limited out from ever getting insurance coverage again, even through the employer. They'd have to go get a different plan on the private market. And basically, that all went away uh, with the ACA, things like that. They used to be able, insurance companies used to be able to say, oh, well, your child was born with I don't know, a heart defect, but you didn't find it till they were 5. Oh, pre-existing condition, we're not covering it. Um, oh, well, you're switching jobs. Yeah, you're coming in with diabetes. Yeah, sorry, we're not covering your insulin. Pre-existing condition. We don't have to treat that. We don't have to cover that anymore. It was the wild, wild west when it came to insurance. Now, you really didn't need, so at one point in this country, you didn't need insurance. Now, I'm too young to remember that, but you didn't really need insurance or whatever. Like, I remember as a kid, maybe because I wasn't paying attention, I don't know, but going to the doctor and never really having to deal, never seeing my parents deal with any sort of a copay up front, any sort of a payment. It didn't seem like it was that big of a deal, and it has steadily gotten worse since then. Now, the ACA is making it better, but it's not as good as it could be. And by getting rid of these subsidies, which the whole point of the subsidies was to make insurance affordable for people, um, they're trying to kill it off. What happened? And the reason I said a little bit ago, what happens to all those kids who were 26 and under in 2010 and have been everybody in that age bracket and has been born since that doesn't know what it's like? Because one of the things the ACA changed was that as a dependent, you were allowed to be claimed as a dependent on your parents' plan until the age of 26, unless you got a job that unless you were offered health insurance through something else or you were covered somewhere else. And I know there were some other requirements like, oh, you couldn't be married and things like that, I believe. Like, if you were already establishing yourself as a married person with dependents, et cetera, on your own, you couldn't still be claimed. Like you couldn't go multiple generations on one insurance plan, things like that. At least not through the subsidies, et cetera. You might been able to do it on a private plan. Um, but the people who have been used to doing things under this system, and if it fails and you repeal it, it's one of the reasons why they've tried, but they have never had the votes in Congress to repeal the Affordable Care Act because they know how bad it is going to be politically. They don't know what to do. They don't have a game plan. So their only hope here is to starve it out basically and hope that if they just quit the subsidies, healthcare is going to get expensive and people are going to be pissed at the Affordable Care Act. Except everybody knows where the blame falls. It falls on Republicans. They are not as slick as they want to be. They would have, if the Democrats would have had at least one chamber of Congress, they could have maybe gotten away with blaming Democrats and said, well, they didn't want to negotiate well enough or whatever. But they're not doing that. Everybody will know that the blame for the ACA lands with Republicans. Now, Friday night, Donald Trump returned to Palm Beach after a rally in North Carolina, and he did something that is sparking some health concerns. Now, as he was getting out of the plane, he is seen walking very gingerly down the steps, gripping the rail like he has been doing lately. And he's talked about that before, about how he was advised to, go slow down steps so he doesn't fall. And which is weird because Donald Trump, at least admitting that much, doesn't fit with the overall story he would want you to believe about his health, right? That he's in great health. But what's this leg tapping thing? Because he gets out, taps his hip, taps his leg, not sure which. And this isn't the first time this has been caught on camera. Apparently, he has been doing it for a while now. And some people are starting to wonder, is it a sign that maybe his leg was just asleep? Something that happens to a lot of people. You know, it's happened to me just sitting here recording the podcast. It happens, right? But when you add that in with everything else that we've seen about his health, it sparks concerns that he's not doing well. There's a lot of comments saying that he can barely walk at this point. You know, he tapping his leg to make sure he still had feeling before, and that before he started down the steps so that he didn't fall forward. Could be. Could have just been asleep. Could have been a little bit of jet lag. Um, we don't know, and we're not getting straight answers out of this administration. Now, Donald Trump's health has been a very serious concern for a while. He's talking about, how he's in such great shape and he's this and he's that, but he's really not when you look at it, right? He's got all of these issues. He's got um, the bruising on his hands. He's dozing in public. He's falling asleep at random events, and then he comes out with this midweek address to the nation where he's basically screaming um, at the uh, at the nation there, and he seemed very hopped up. Now maybe he was, maybe he wasn't, but there's so many concerns about his health. This just adds more fuel to that fire. I don't think Donald Trump is well. I think he is ultimately not going to make it to the end of his term. Now, beyond any sort of move by the Republican Party to get rid of him ahead of time, I just would be very surprised if he is still president come January 20th, 2029. Now, he can't be president past that. They don't have the votes to change the Constitution. I just don't see it happening. He's not going to make it, and there's no way he can run for a third term. But with everything we are seeing, I don't know why he would want to run for a third term, other than for the whole reason he ran this time, which was to stay out of prison. Donald Trump is not in good shape, and every time he goes anywhere anymore, there's more and more details being shown, and that there is a problem with Donald Trump. Could this leg tapping be just another sign of age? Maybe it was innocent. And if we wouldn't have all of the other issues that we have seen with his legs, like for example, how he kind of appears to shuffle side to side and he can't walk in a straight line anymore. He kind of weaves like a drunk person, and he drags his foot. You add all of it together and it makes you wonder what is wrong with him. And we should know. Now, when the Democrats get back in power, they should really end up looking into uh, Donald Trump and his health and who knew what, especially if Donald Trump doesn't make it to the end of his term. They need to hold investigations like the Republicans tried to do with Joe Biden. The difference would be here there's actually something to find, there's actually a cause for concern with Donald Trump's health. Um, Now, very briefly, before I wrap things up here, I wanted to talk about. I mentioned that midweek address that Donald Trump gave to the nation, where he is effectively screaming into the void, yelling at it. He seemed very high energy compared to a lot of um, the other episodes of Donald Trump speaking to the press and stuff. He seemed to have a lot more energy and a lot more um, everything about him, right? And I thought at the time it might have been pre-recorded. Well, some people are now suggesting it might have been AI generated. I don't think it is a completely AI generated because Donald Trump, I don't think he would allow AI to be used like that to make himself look better because he wouldn't believe that he needed an AI generated address to the nation, that he could go out and speak and been fine. But there are some inconsistencies. Apparently, uh, if you look at the flag in the background a couple times, there's some inconsistencies with how it looks and things like that. Now, what I think might have happened is Donald Trump went out and he gave the speech. They pre recorded it. But it wouldn't surprise me if they put it through AI after to increase, to make it look like he's healthier, etc. And honestly, I think Donald Trump would probably believe if it was word for word what he had said, and they put it through, and that's what they came up with. He would probably believe that's exactly how he sounded the first time. because that's probably what he imagines himself sounding like. No, I know that's a conspiracy theory that they put it through AI. We don't know that for sure. But it also kind of makes sense, right? We're not seeing that same angry, full of vitriol Donald Trump that we used to see. He's a lot more low energy. We know the time is coming. And you add all that in with his other health concerns, and it's a very real concern that he may not make it to the end of his term. And of course, that would give us JD Vance, but I'm not as worried about JD Vance because he will get better advisors and he won't have the same pull and the same sway over Congress. And if it doesn't happen till after the midterms, well, there's going to be at least one chamber, if not both, controlled by Democrats. And well, he won't get anything done and he's going to be inconsequential. So we're watching Donald Trump's health. We're watching to see what happens with the Epstein files. And who knows what other crazy shit is going to come out of this administration. But because there's always stuff to talk about, because they're always doing crazy shit, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. And hopefully tomorrow my schedule is going to work out a little better. I'm supposed to be off all day. So hopefully I'll have more TikToks up for you as well, talking about some of these stories. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.